So our talk today by Jennifer Gimbel is especially timely as we face a looming water crisis of historic proportions brought to us by climate change, a booming population, and an outdated Colorado River compact over 100 years old. The last thing we need to do is hide our head in the sand in a state of denial. Jennifer Gimbel has taken on the daunting challenge with courage, determination, professionalism, and integrity. Jennifer has the qualifications. She's a senior water policy scholar at the Colorado Water Center of Colorado State University. She has extensive experience in water law and policy concerning national, interstate, and state of Colorado water issues. She was the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Water and Science at the Department of the Interior. Jennifer was also the Director of the Colorado Water Conservation Board, the premier water policy agency for Colorado. In 2022, Ms. Gimbel received the Aspinall Award from the Colorado Water Congress, an incredibly prestigious award. And as a Terry Stevenson Fellow for the Common Sense Institute in 2022, she and Eric Kuhn produced a key report to guide our state's planning for water issues. It's titled Adopting Colorado's Water Systems for a 21st Century Economy and Water Supply. And that's exactly why she's here today. And Jennifer asked me to be sure to let you know that she enjoys hiking, reading, and as many of us well understand, doting on her grandchildren. Please give a warm Boulder Rotary Club welcome to Jennifer Gimbel.
Thank you so much. Hang on to your hats. This is going to be a whirlwind tour of Colorado, mostly Colorado River issues. But let's go ahead and start with just the basics. Meryl mentioned the report. Go ahead and, oh, there we are. Meryl mentioned the report we did for Common Sense Institute. It's written to business people. We're trying to get the message out with respect to how much water issues affect the economy. And we make some recommendations, some of which were not popular in the water arena, but they are necessary. So it's commonsenseinstitute.org for that report. The other report is also online. I have one hard copy here that I'm going to give to Meryl. But you can get it online at the Water Center, Colorado State EDU. It's on the front page right now. Just scroll down a little bit, and you can get an electronic copy. This is all about the Colorado River. It talks about the history, it talks about the different laws and agreements, administration, and it talks about some of the top issues, like the tribes, like the environmental community. So I hope that you would look at it and enjoy the read. I purposely made this not for water wonks. I had my neighbor read this report. He didn't get through the whole thing, but at least he was able to tell me where we were getting too much in the weeds. So here's what we're dealing with in Colorado and in the West. We're just at the epicenter of climate change right now. We're getting hotter. As you can see in the chart there in the lower right, those are the average temperatures in Colorado for the last since 1900. Definitely getting hotter. We're getting drier. It's getting more arid. In fact, we don't call it a drought anymore. The scientists are saying this is beyond a drought. A drought implies that you get over it. This is the new, Brad Udall hates this quote, but it's the new normal, essentially. It's what we have to deal with. Plants, when it gets hot and dry like that, Plants need no more water, so farmers need more water. The soil moisture dries up. We see from runoff, the largest reservoir in Colorado. Let me ask a question. Do you know what the largest reservoir of water is in Colorado?
Blue Mesa.
Nope, not Blue Mesa.
Dillon.
Not Dillon, not Grand. The snowpack. The snowpack. We live and die by the snowpack. That's the largest resource. What we're finding is it's running off faster and sooner, and because the soil is so dry, the soil is sucking it up, which is part of the problems that we've had with respect to the Colorado River. So floods, dramatic events, fires, then floods. And I've noticed hailstones are getting bigger. This was the hailstone a few weeks ago at Lamar. It measures over 5 inches. Can you imagine that coming down at you? So that's what we're dealing with here. Now, Colorado is a headwaters state. We supply water to almost 19 other states and millions of people and farmlands. This is a map, we call it the snake map. It comes from the state engineer's office, and it gives you a sense of the different rivers and how much water flows out of state. Now, as you know, water's for fighting. And this is just one of my favorite Remington photos. Water's for fighting. And we have all this water, and so we have to figure out how to share that with our neighbors. And that's a challenge. Well, a fellow in the 1900s, a fellow named Delph Carpenter from Greeley, Colorado, a rancher, a lawyer, worked with the state and said, you know, instead of going to court and the state's fighting over this in court, because Wyoming and Colorado were in front of the Supreme Court in the early 1900s to divide up the Laramie River. So instead of going to court, what if we all agreed on how to share this water? So 3/4 of the water that's generated in Colorado goes out of state. We have obligations to other states under compacts. Compact is an agreement. Its authority is the United States Constitution under the Compact Clause. 2 states can come together, 2 or more, and can come to an agreement on something. It used to be mostly for boundary issues, but now it's water also. The agreement then must be approved by each state's legislature and then by Congress. So when you have a water compact, like we have on the South Platte, like we have on the Colorado River, it is an agreement, a contract, it is state law, and it is federal law. Now that should answer the question, why can't we just change these compacts and get ourselves a better deal? Nah, it's gonna take a lot of doing to do that. We also have 2 rivers that we have Supreme Court decrees on. So I wanted to talk mostly about Colorado River. It's a fascinating river. It's so important to the state of Colorado. You know, you see some, you see the stats here, 1,400 miles, 7 states, 2 nations, 40 million people, 5.5 million acre feet, generate 4,200 megawatts of power. The Colorado River and its water supports $1.5 trillion to the economy of the United States every year. I have this map. I chose this specific one to show you because if you look at the edges, you'll see the red hatched areas. Most of the Colorado River water is used outside of the Colorado River Basin. So it supplies water to Cheyenne, Salt Lake, the Denver area. Half of Denver's water comes from the Colorado River. Aurora's water, a quarter of Aurora's water comes from the Colorado River. A substantial amount, 500,000 acre-feet, comes over from the Colorado River to supply municipalities and farmers in the Arkansas River and in the South Platte River. That's how important the Colorado is to the state. Now, how do you go about splitting up a river? Well, these gentlemen in the about 1918, 1920, got together and tried to figure out how much each state should get. Well, how do you do that? First, you have to find out how much water's in the river. So USGS did a study. The predecessor to the Bureau of Reclamation did a study. Reclamation study said, you know what, on an average, there's 20 million acre-feet of water a year. An acre-foot of water, by the way, is what you get if you take a football field and put a 1-foot layer edge on it and fill it with water. It supports about three families a year, 1 acre-foot. So that's kind of the dynamic we're talking about. The USGS said, there's not that much water. It's probably more like 12 or 13 million acre-feet. Well, being politicians, knowing they had to sell this agreement to their states and their governors, they agreed to divide up the river, thinking it had a basis of 20 million acre-feet a year. They were wrong. Still, they couldn't figure out how to divide it among the states. So what they did is they divided it between the two basins, the upper basin and the lower basin. The upper basin and the divide line on the Colorado River is at a point called Lee Ferry, which is in the Grand Canyon, by the way. If you float the Grand Canyon, you go right by it. And they said, let's just divvy up half and half. Let's say we'll go 15 million acre-feet, when in their mind was conservative, and half to the upper basin and half to the lower basin. So each basin gets 7.5 million acre-feet of water a year. We also have an obligation under a treaty with Mexico to send Mexico 1.5 million acre-feet a year. So that seemed to make sense, except how are you going to deliver it? Well, the lower basin was having issues with flooding, terrible flooding. And so they went to Congress and said, we need a reservoir that catches this water, and then they can use that reservoir to deliver water to the lower basin. And so, let's see, what's my next slide? So we have two dams, main dams on the river. These are the largest dams in the United States when full. We have Hoover Dam and Lake Mead, and this is where the lower basin states, Arizona, California, and Nevada, that's where they get their water. They take their water out of that reservoir. They have a contract with the Bureau of Reclamation. Reclamation and the secretary are considered a water master, essentially. And that's how they get their water. In the upper basin, we don't have that luxury. In the upper basin, though, we were able to convince Congress in the 60s to add Glen Canyon Dam. And Glen Canyon Dam then is what holds up Lake Powell. A lot of recreation on Lake Powell. That becomes the bank account for the upper basin, because the compact requires that we have to allow a certain amount of water to get to the lower basin. So Lake Powell is a bank account for us. Unfortunately, though, for the upper basin, we don't have a reservoir above us. And so we live and die, the farmers, the municipalities, on whatever Mother Nature gives us every year. So there are many times when farmers are shut off up here, even some farmers that have pre-contact rights, because they're not the seniors in the river for the calls. So it's two different systems, and this is part of the struggle we've had on the river. There are also 30 recognized federal recognized tribes on the river. Most of them have had their water rights adjudicated. Some of them haven't. And if they get everything they're asked for, they would get essentially 6 million acre feet of the Colorado River water. That's a lot. So what's happened? This is the unregulated inflow into Powell starting from 1964 when Powell started filling, and the projected numbers for 2024. The negotiators agreed that there were 15 million acre feet of water a year to divide between the two states. If you'll look at that black line, that is the average flows since 1964, and we're talking 9.5 million acre feet. So when you're reading about a crisis on the Colorado River, the reason it didn't get critical until a couple years ago was because we had these two full reservoirs, and the lower basin kept drawing from those reservoirs, and they drew more. They drew there 7.5, actually sometimes more, and essentially started to drain the reservoirs. So we were in a crisis. The way the river had been organized and run wasn't working. So the secretary came to the states and said, figure out how to do this better. Lots of negotiation. I'm not going to go into details about this. These are months and months and hours of negotiation, trying to figure out how to run the river and keep the dams from bottoming out. Now, what's wrong with the dams bottoming out? Well, they're not built to be empty. There are structural issues if the water's not part of that, holding that dam up. There are hydropower issues. Lake Powell got so low, we were sure that in this year, we were blessed by Mother Nature, but we were sure we were going to go below power pool. That means that a lot of electric power wasn't going to be generated. And the power that comes from these dams and plants is really a low-cost power, mostly for rural America and the tribes. So it was getting serious. And now I'm an upper basin person. The lower basin kept taking more and more and more. So the secretary finally said, we have to have shortages. And you probably read it in the Denver Post. Secretary declares shortages. Those shortages did not come to Colorado. Those were shortages to the lower basin pursuant to the agreements. So the lower basin had to take less water. In 2022, 613,000 acre feet less. In 2023, 721 is what they were predicted to take, but Mother Nature came to the rescue. Now, Mother Nature was very kind to us this year, and she gave us breathing room, and she gave the states breathing room. This is not the end of the drought. We're still in aridification. We would need 4 or 5 consecutive years like this year to fill up those lakes again. So it's just a warning. Well, this wasn't enough either. So Congress decided to come to the rescue. And this is an adage in water law that money flows uphill to water. And Congress threw $4 billion at the Colorado River and said, you need to figure out how to keep more water in the reservoirs, put more water in the river. Something's got to be done. paying farmers to fallow land, investing in research. We had system conservation activities, but it's still not enough. So I want to just set out the upper basin efforts, because you've read about this in the news. A couple years ago, there was a huge release of Mesa, nearly bottomed out the lake. Flaming Gorge was also, a lot of water was released to go down to Lake Powell to help the structure, but unfortunately, not only did it help the structure at Lake Powell, but it allowed the lake, the lower basin then, to call that water out of Mead. We strict compliance with our water law, ability to store some conserved water in Powell. We had a system conservation pilot program. This was paying farmers to fallow land or to, just irrigate part-time, allow them to experiment and see if we were able to get more water into the river. Unfortunately, it did not produce the kind of water that we need to save Lake Powell. There have been demand management discussions by Colorado Water Conservation Board. They had this huge task force, as well as what's something called the Interbasin Compact Committee. I think that's what they are. And these are the people from all over the state to say, how can we manage the river better in Colorado? What can we do to get more water into the river? And the last thing that just came up this legislative session, Senator Thomas set up the Colorado River Drought Task Force. And this again is bringing people from different parts of the state to say, how can we manage the river better? And what can we do to keep water in it? So all of those agreements are short-term, all of them. They end at the end of 2026. So our leaders now, and leaders in the state and the federal government, are now getting ready to negotiate what to do next. The agreements didn't work, we know that. So lots of modeling being done, and they're looking for long-term solutions. And let me finish with, what can you do? And this is not just the Colorado River, this is just in general, because I get asked this question at every Rotary Club meeting I go to. Support the water conservation efforts in your community. Nobody likes that their water rates are high, have to be increased, but they have to be increased. The water, the infrastructure, it's got to get taken care of. Your water leaders, here the governor, and now Becky Mitchell, who is our main negotiator on the Colorado River, are going to have to make some very difficult decisions. Boulder County has made some difficult decisions. It's just inevitable when water is getting less and less. Support those decisions, learn about them. Go to some water meetings. There are things called roundtables in each basin. There's in the South Platte Basin, and then we have the Metro Basin roundtables. They're Zoom. You can just link in on Zoom, go look at them. I'm on the board for Northern Water Conservancy District. We do 2 meetings a year. Costs nothing. Great summary of what's going on in the water world. One last thing I want to say, because I'm on my time here, and that is, let's talk South Platte River for a minute. You all saw the governor a couple years ago said, Colorado's stealing our water on the South Platte. We're going to build a diversion that is allowed under the compact, South Platte Compact. He's right, it's allowed. He's not right about a few other things, but it's in the news. Water is in the news. Pay attention to what's going on. The South Platte used to run dry at about Brush, Colorado. So if you want the river to go back to natural straits, that's that would happen. But because of the development in the upper part of the South Platte, because of the irrigation, because of the return flows, we have a whole economy that's established below that point. That's where a lot of our food comes from. And so again, it's in the news, and pay attention. And Merle has my email address, and if you have questions beyond right now, I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Wow, thank you. It all makes sense now when you read the newspaper. My question is probably a dumb one. Is it physically and politically possible to build a dam for the upper basin folks?
So in 64, 4 dams or 3 units were approved for the upper basin. And that's the Mesa, Lake Mesa and the Curriconte unit, it's called. There are 3 dams there, Flaming Gorge and the Navajo. Those were built, again, to help us comply with the compact. I believe there's still room for some strategic storage to be built in Colorado to help us with our managing water issues. And I don't know if I answered your question directly. Did that hit it?
Well, I was wondering whether it was a dam, but apparently there was something else that would provide storage.
Well, to build a dam these days, you have to do a lot of environmental permitting, and quite honestly, sometimes there's just not the water in the river to fill it. If we go up into the headwaters, that's where I think we could strategically build some dams to catch the water like we got this year. You know, we had tons of water going to Nebraska this year. And as an old water buffalo, if it goes out of state, it's wasted unless we have to share it like we do in our agreements. Great. Another question?
You know, when I first heard about climate change, the speaker mentioned that in each geological period of warming, before it was our fault, the planet got warmer and wetter.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's a lot of evidence that we're getting wetter. It's just in the wrong places as far as population. Is there any talk about a real infrastructure plan to move excess water from where it's excess to places where it certainly would be helpful?
An interesting, last week I got a call from the Associated Press asking me about a proposal to take water out of the Mississippi River and bring it to the Southwest. And the states along the Mississippi River are feeling threatened by that and now going to compact and help protect that. On a practical level, it's really difficult. I've seen proposals where we bring icebergs down from the North Pole, or we take water out of the Great Lakes, or we take it out of Columbia River. It's just, it would go through so many different jurisdictions. It would cost a lot of money, and it would be, and I don't know if it would be politically sellable.
Sounds like building a railroad.
It's exactly right.
First of all, thank you for that very informative presentation. I was wondering, in the 80s, I had a home in Pine Brook that was off the grid, including a unit for water that was called Pure Cycle. And that company did not make it because it was too expensive they needed more homes to be having the Pure Cycle system set up. I'm wondering, number one, that system, if the water level was ever getting low, we would just have a beer party and ask everyone to use the toilet before they left, and it would restock it. Is there anything going on with investment in that kind of a project, or money being put into research to create those kinds of systems more expansively?
The answer is yes. There's a lot of research going on out there. Meryl and I were talking about the Israelis and the work they've done. Australia's done an incredible amount of work. So the answer is yes, it's there. Now, can we make it affordable for homeowners? That gets to be the challenge. And are we using too much energy? For instance, you can have a desalination plant, and there's some on the coast in California, but it costs a lot of money or a lot of energy to treat that water and put the salt back in the ocean. And then when you put the salt back in the ocean, you change the salt content if it's too close to the coast. And so there are a lot of considerations, but Australia and Israeli are leaders in this.
So thanks for coming to speak with us today. I had a quick question about the breakdown of farm and agricultural use relative to human, societal use. I remember when we had a talk a couple of years ago, I was struck by how much of our water in Colorado is used for farming relative to people's use. And I imagine that it's really difficult to have those conversations with farmers about livelihood and generations of farms, et cetera. But simultaneously, I know from having read some that there are products that we grow here and in the upper and lower basins that are goofy products to be growing agriculturally in these areas because they're so water intensive. I wondered if you could speak a little bit to the breakdown between agricultural use and sort of city use of water. I know that there's kind of a role for everybody. I'm trying to get my son to stop taking 25-minute showers, but he's 15, so I'm trying hard.
Yeah, good luck. Yeah, that's a good question. 90% of Colorado's water goes to agriculture. And another thing, the Colorado Conservation Board put out the next version of the Colorado Water Plan. So if you just Google Colorado Water Plan, you can get the executive summary, or you can get the whole 200 and some pages of the water plan. But they talk about, how water is used in the state. And you named the difficulties for farmers with respect to changing things. I have a friend who has a farm up in Brighton here. He ended up having to change his crops. He grew vegetables. So he knew the market for vegetable. He had the seeds coming in. He was all set up, but it wasn't working. And it wasn't working not because of the water, because he had no place to put his workers that came in to pick those crops. And so he had to change crops. If you talk to a farmer about changing crops, they're businessmen. They're smart businessmen, and they're going to think of how this plays out in the long term. Colorado State University actually is experimenting with some different crops, like black-eyed peas, take less water and are nutritious, and we don't see them much here, but we see them a lot in the South. So there is some work going on with that, but you hit the exact reasons. It's hard. It's hard to change your machinery. It's expensive to change your machinery. My recommendation on the $4 billion was let's invest in individual farmers and say, we will help you. We will give you money to change out things and help those expenses. But you made the farmer's case quite well.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jennifer Gimbel. I really enjoyed that speech, and we all thank you so much for coming here and educating us a little bit more about water. And we're very thankful for your dedication towards stewardship and conservation of water and our environment. On behalf of our group, we'd like to, in your honor, we're pleased to contribute 100 doses of vaccine to the Polio Plus Fund. After 35 years of arduous work, Rotary and its partners are on the brink of eradicating this tenacious disease, but a strong push is needed now to root it out once and for all. It is conceivable for polio to be eradicated in the next few years. It is a window of opportunity of historic proportions as we move forward with the polio endgame strategy. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate the donation.